Welcome to this masterclass on the wisdom of the Bhagwat Gita. I'm Pamposh Dhar, founder of a small company called Terataii. I'm a Reiki healer and teacher and a counselor and coach. I also teach meditation and I teach the wisdom of the Bhagwat Gita, which is what I'm going to share with you today. I'm going to try and give you an overview of this wonderful wisdom. Not do a deep dive into any of the concepts, just a good overview of the Gita as a whole. So let's get started. Before we dive into the Gita, just a little bit of context. The most important to my mind is the Vedic context, because the Gita is very much in the tradition of the Vedas, the Vedanta, and the Upanishads. And it comes perhaps 1,000 or 2,000 years after the first Veda was composed. It, in a sense, encapsulates the wisdom part of this Vedic tradition, not the hymns and mantras that are also part of the Vedas, but just the philosophy and the wisdom. The other more practical context is that of the Mahabharata, because the Gita, as I'm sure we all know, is part of this epic text. Many scholars think it's really a standalone part of the Mahabharata, and I tend to agree with that. You could actually take the Gita right out of the Mahabharata and it wouldn't lose anything. But I would say it enhances the Mahabharata. To me, it is the spiritual heart of the Mahabharata. The only time we really see that connection very clearly is in chapter 1. But throughout the Gita, we see the image or the metaphor of war, which comes from the Mahabharata, because in the Mahabharata, the Gita of the dialogue of the Gita takes place on the battlefield just before the start of the war between the Pandavas and the Kauravas. So, is it spirituality, is it wisdom, or is it religion? I guess it's a bit of all three, because it talks a lot about the soul, so that would make it quite spiritual. It has a lot of wisdom, both spiritual and very, very practical wisdom as well. How do I live well? How really can I go about living a good life, which I think is very practical. And it discusses the nature of God. So in that sense, it gets into religion as well. But historically speaking, it is a pre-Hindu philosophy. So religion as religion, yes, but not so much in terms of this or that religion. The word Hindu was coined by the Persians and came into use in the 13th century, a long time after the Gita was written. The Gita is at least 2,500 years old, if not more. And the word Hindu in Persian and later in Arabic and finally in Urdu as well, referred to the river Sindhu, which is the Indus River. So it meant the people of India, the people who live in the Indus Valley and across that. So that's just a little bit of history, and you can put it in whatever context you like. The other aspect is that all of this Vedic knowledge is also called Brahma Vidya, which means knowledge that will help you to realize Brahman, not Brahma, but Brahman. And I will talk about that later. But for now, help you to realize God. And it is believed that if you totally understand and realize yourself, your highest self, then you are well on the way to realizing God as well. So I want to start with the practical wisdom of the Gita, which is how do we live well? How do we live a good life? And the Gita shows us 4 paths. You can choose whatever path works best for you. So there's a lot of choice here. And these 4 paths are Jnana Yoga, the path of knowledge and wisdom. It's not only knowledge, it's understanding that knowledge and putting it into use. So that is, to me, wisdom, when you start applying your knowledge and don't just keep it in your head. It's not much use if it just stays in your head. So Jnana Yoga, I would say, is the path of wisdom. Karma Yoga is the path of action, but of course, of right action. We all take action throughout our lives, but not every action is the right action. But living a life based on truth, on doing what's right in every moment, that is Karma Yoga. Next comes Bhakti Yoga, which is the path of love and devotion. It's the devotion to God, of course, but also to all of God's creation. So it's love for every human being, every living being, if possible, love for the universe itself, the world we live in, and devotion to all of that. And finally, we come to Raja Yoga. This is really for those who want a bit of all three of the other yogas, all three of the other paths. Most people will walk not only one path, at least two, but maybe not three, and maybe not in equal proportion. Of course, it doesn't have to be exactly equal, but Raja Yogis actually walk in good proportion, all three paths. So I just quickly want to say that if you're on the path of Jnana Yoga, when you start implementing your knowledge and understanding, you actually move into Karma Yoga. And if you're walking the path of Karma Yoga, you are a very active person, you want to focus on action, you need to take your right action, which means you need the knowledge to tell you what is right action. So those two particularly, I think, are very closely related. But again, it's up to each individual what they choose. Coming back to Raja Yoga, it relies very largely on meditation, which is a way to actually also gain spiritual knowledge, self-knowledge, and understanding of the self, and access your own inner wisdom as well. It also brings peace and calmness, which is associated with a wise person or an spiritually advanced person as well. So those are the four paths. Now, moving on to more of the philosophical concepts, starting with self-knowledge. Who are we really? I don't mean I am Pamposh and you are somebody else, whoever is watching this. But as human beings, who are we really? So the Gita tells us that we all live at 5 levels, starting with the body. Along with the body come the sense organs. So your sense of hearing is heard through your ears. So the sense organ is your ears, your eyes for sight, your nose, and so on. And above that, the body and the sense organs are the senses, the ability to hear, see, taste, and so on. Above that is something that in Sanskrit is called manas, which is mind. And above manas is buddhi, which is usually translated as intellect. But if you think of this, you think of the fact that this has the same root as the word for Buddha, which is an awakened person, then buddhi is actually a little bit more than intellect. It's really more of an awakened mind. And above all is your Atma or Atman. I'm not going to get into debates on pronunciation. You can use whichever word you like. And that is your soul. So if you can connect better to your own soul, you're well on the path of spiritual development, of deeper understanding, of living really well. That is the highest part of us. Each of us is the soul. And this has many implications. So many people are extremely aware of their bodies and their minds, but not really so aware of the soul. But that is the best part of you. The other thing you might notice is there's no mention of heart here, because the heart is seen more or less as a physical organ in the Gita, not really the seat of the emotions, because all our emotions come from our thoughts. I don't want to go into this right now, but this is also an important teaching, that your emotions really come from your thoughts. So therefore, they really come from the mind. just a little quote about the soul, basically. So this is from a priest, Jesuit priest, French Jesuit priest. We are not human beings having a spiritual experience. We are spiritual beings having a human experience. So which part of us is really the most important? Is it this human body and shape, or is it really the soul that has taken on this body for this lifetime? And now a quote from the Gita, in the Gita spoken by Krishna. The wise grieve neither for the living nor the dead. And why is that? Because if you're born, you are bound to die. So where's the point in grieving about that? And according to the Vedic tradition, according to the Gita, if you die, you will be born again unless you achieve moksha, liberation. Until that time, every time you die, you'll be born again. Every time you're born, you will die. So what is the point of grieving? But more importantly, what is it that dies? So another quote, the body is mortal, but that which dwells in the body is said to be immortal and immeasurable. Again, from the Gita, chapter 2. So what dies? When we die, what part of us dies? Is it the body, the mind, the soul? The soul always lives on. So if we identify with our soul, if I believe I'm really at my best, I am my Atma, my soul, then do I die when death comes knocking? Not really. So there's nothing to grieve about. Moving on now to another concept, which is very important, of course, in the Gita, the concept of Dharma. This is effectively the first word in the Gita, very important word. The first word is actually about a person speaking, first two words, but then the first word of the dialogue is Dharma Kshetra, Kurukshetra. So very important. And in the Gita, the term Dharma has three meanings. Dharma as righteousness. Righteousness is not to be confused with self-righteousness. Self-righteousness makes us very judgmental and really a bit silly, if not stupid. Righteousness simply means doing the right thing. So dharma is doing what's right, and every species has its own dharma. So as human beings, we are not meant to kill other human beings without very good reason. In a war, you do, of course, and the Gita is set at the beginning of a war. So it's not completely against all violence, but what I would call wanton violence. So as a human being, you don't do that, for example. That's just one example. But dharma, of course, obviously, there are many things. Then the second meaning of dharma is responsibility. So we all have our obligations, our responsibilities in the world. I feel very strongly that if you bring a child into the world, for example, you do have a responsibility to take care of them, to educate them, and so on. Beyond that, people will decide for themselves what their responsibilities really are, where they lie. But don't shirk your responsibilities in whatever way you see them and understand them. And finally, we come to this concept of swadharma, my individual dharma. So everyone is born with something to contribute to the world. And it's actually quite important to find what that is. So I started my work life as a journalist, and then I moved to public communication, working with development agencies. And finally, now I've come to where I am. As I said at the beginning, I'm a healer, I'm a teacher, and I feel that this is really my dharma. This is what I was born to do. And all the rest was just preparation for this. That's not to say that the rest was useless. I feel that journalists have a lot to contribute to the world, and I did my small bit. Same with, when I worked for development agencies. But for me personally, this is like, I feel like I've really come into my own. I really come into that space, which is where I can help most. So it's quite important to find your own calling in a sense. And now the law of karma. And here's a quote from the Bible. So you can see that these principles are not limited to any particular faith tradition or wisdom tradition. They're really universal, but they're expressed in different ways in different traditions. So from the Bible now, as you sow, so shall you reap. Sorry, excuse me. As you sow, so shall you reap. A law of life, the law of karma is a law of life. It is a law of cause and effect. So they say if you plant a pear tree and you water it and make sure it gets enough sunlight, one day you can expect to get pears from that tree, but you will not get apples. So what you sow will literally bring you a certain kind of fruit. There is no judgment in this law. I think a lot of people lose their way because they think there's some God-like figure standing or sitting in judgment on everything they do. No one is sitting there meting out reward or punishment. It is just that you take a certain action, it has a certain consequence. Sometimes your karma also meets with other people's karma. There's also group karma. So there's family karma, there's national karma, and so on. But all of it is based on cause and effect. It is not about reward or punishment. It is simply that a certain cause will lead to a certain set of possibilities. Okay. And therefore a certain result. The Gita is very big on this idea of what's called nishkama karma, which is usually translated as selfless service. I would rather translate it as unselfish action or unselfish service, because selfless in sort of sounds like you're negating yourself, but each of us is important. I'm very important, but so is everybody else. So if my action is going to impact others, then I must think of what that impact might be. And I should take action in the highest interest of myself and everybody else as well, everyone else who's likely to be impacted by my action. So, in that sense, you're not being selfish. You're not just thinking of yourself. You're not thinking of a reward for yourself. You're not trying to avoid something for yourself. You're doing what's right. If you always do what you believe to be right, you won't go wrong. Now, this concept of vairagya, detachment or non-attachment. So detachment sometimes trips people up because when we use it in normal parlance in English, it has a different meaning. So I had a client, I was counseling her, and she complained about her husband being very detached. For a moment, I thought, oh, he's achieved non-attachment. But what she meant is he's not involved in her ideas or her emotions. He's quite aloof. So being detached has come to mean being aloof. That is not the spiritual concept of detachment. So it doesn't take you away from loving others, doesn't take you away from caring for others or caring for things even. Doesn't mean you have no desires, you don't want anything, or you don't dislike anything. All of that is fine. So long as you don't get entangled in your own likes and dislikes too much, you're not so attached to something that you feel you can't live without it. That is an addiction, and that's attachment. So when I do Reiki and when I teach Reiki, I teach this as well. We do Reiki with the highest intention for the highest good of the person we are doing Reiki for and the highest good of all. And sometimes we expect a certain result. So if somebody comes to me and says, I've got this or that problem, of course I want to help them heal from that. But it doesn't always happen that way. There may be something else that's in that person's best interest. There may be something else that needs healing first. So I should be able to accept the result. I shouldn't get so attached to my own expectations and desires that I can't take a different result in my stride. That is attachment. It's not lack of caring. Please understand that. In fact, I sometimes say that one of the central messages of the Gita is detachment with engagement. But because it's a teaching for people who are living worldly lives, living in the world, it's not a teaching for sannyasis. So we are engaging with the world, but not getting entangled in it. This is a very difficult concept, but where it's central to an understanding of the Gita. Detachment and karma yoga. So another quote again from chapter 2. Chapter 2 is a wonderful chapter, lots of wisdom there. You have the right to work, but never to the fruit of work. So this is just what I was saying before. Of course, we all take action and we have a certain expectation in mind. Otherwise, if we had no expectations, we would have no sense of purpose. We would lead purposeless lives. So that's fine, that's good. But if that expectation is not met, can you take that in your stride and move on? And maybe try again if that's appropriate. But today, this expectation was not met. I did my action, my work with the best intention. I took what I believed to be right action, whether the expectation was met or not, whether I got a reward or some kind of harm came to me, but I still did the right thing. Took the right action. So let's say let's apply this in a work situation. So let's say I've been really working for a promotion, but I have a very strong competitor. Do I go and run down this other person or try and sabotage their work in some way? No, of course not. Even though I may lose out to that other person, I will take right action. I will hope that I get the promotion. But if I don't, well, I don't. I did my best. Maya, this is a big topic, but the most important aspect of Maya is the illusion of separateness, that we are all separate human beings, we have no connection with others, or people think in groups. I'm Indian, I'm a woman, I'm Hindu, whatever it might be. And everybody else is outside this group. So it becomes a very exclusionary way of looking at life. But if you start to really live from the soul, if you understand that that is the best part of you, then you will realize that we're not really separate. At the least, we are all connected. So soul in Sanskrit is called Atma or Atman. And there is a concept of Jivatma, which is an individual soul. So I have a Jivatma, which is in my body. But where did this come from? The idea is that the soul, each of us has a soul, but they all come from the same source. And eventually they will end up at the same destination. So one way to think of this is to think of water. So people usually, I give the analogy of an ocean of water. If you take a few drops out of the ocean, the drops are no longer part of the ocean, but they're still what they were. They are still water. So in the same way, we are still soul, even when we are living in a body. So this is the most damaging illusion of all. And this makes it much easier for us to harm other human beings and to do what's called othering. I'm this, but you're that. You're outside my group. And somehow you're less than me. So this is a very, very wrong concept. Anyone who is well connected to their soul will understand this very easily. There are other illusions in life. Another one is that we mistake the temporary for the permanent. So we look at our bodies and we say, oh, solid body. I've got a really solid body, a big body, so fine. Great, I can really feel this. This is what I am. But this body is temporary. It's on loan to me for this lifetime. What's permanent is my soul. But when you don't see that boundary, or you start to think the body is going to last forever, that's a big illusion as well. Of course, nobody consciously thinks that, but many people act as if they believe that, and that's their illusion. Now, coming to the more esoteric parts of the Gita, the idea of God. In the Gita, Krishna is an avatar, an incarnation of God. When the Gita starts, he's actually simply a good friend of Arjuna's, Arjuna being the other central character, of course, in the Gita. But he then eventually reveals himself as God. So he's a vision, an incarnation of God. But God is Brahman. So this is quite important. A lot of people, including many Hindus, think that Hinduism believes in, I don't know how many, 300 odd gods. But Hindu philosophy, if we take the Gita to be Hindu philosophy, then Hindu philosophy does not teach that. There is one God, and we are not given a vision of this God. So we can't say he's tall or short, or is he or she or what. We have, it's an idea. It's not an image. So the idea of one God as Brahman, and very many different visions of this one God. Because I might relate to one vision, you might relate to some other vision. So within the context of Hindu traditions, let's say, I might be a follower of Krishna, you might be a follower of Durga, whatever it might be. But they are all different visions of the same God. And if we take this concept a little bit further, then whether I worship Ishvara or Allah or the Christian idea of God, which is not exactly Jesus, but whatever it is, they're just different visions, different ways to connect with God, to make it easier for us to connect to God. So this is also a very important tenet of the Gita. The other big idea in the Gita is this idea of God within and God without. So it's up to you how you worship God or how you connect to the energy of God, and let that make you a good human being. You can think of God within you, and many of you would have heard the phrase Aham Brahmasmi, I am God. It doesn't mean that I have to become really arrogant and say I'm better than everybody else. All of us have that God energy within us. But we can also say, I worship Krishna or Durga or whoever it might be. So it's our choice. God is both within us and without, that is around us, outside of us. God is everywhere, everything. But if you're thinking of God within, then one way to think of it is that you're connected to God through your soul. So I mentioned Jivatma, which is my Atma, like individual Atma. And one of the words for God is Paramatma, which is the supreme soul. And that actually shows you a bit of the connection, that we're connected through the soul to God and therefore to everyone else as well. God outside yourself. I think, I may be wrong, but I think most bhakti yogis actually worship a God outside, not within. Maybe they do both as well. So love and devotion to God, whichever way you imagine God to be, whatever God looks like or feels like, or whatever you call God, but also to all of God's creations, all of the creatures of this world and the world itself. I think there is so much abuse of this beautiful planet of ours, but if you really love God and are devoted to God, then how can you be abusive to God's creation? So that's something that I would love more and more people to think about. The idea of God within you, and again, this is not an idea limited to the Vedic tradition. So Jesus said, the kingdom of God is within you, very clear indication. And then from one of the Upanishads, the Chandogya Upanishad, This one phrase that many of you may have heard, but you may or may not know the full story. Tat tvam asi. Literally, it means you are that. But the story behind this phrase is that a young man is asking his father to impart wisdom, spiritual wisdom to him. And the father describes the nature of God. And then he says to his son, you are that. So again, that idea of God within, you don't have to go far to find God. And we see this in some of the folk traditions. Kabir has written about that as well. This idea that God is already here with you. I think that's a good place to end this presentation. Thank you so much for watching, for listening, and I hope I was able to kindle some interest in the Gita. Thank you.